Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I will be providing my review of the book The Burning God by R.F. Kuang, the third book in the Poppy War trilogy. I read the first book in the series, The Poppy War, back in 2020, and I thought it was a good book. I didn't think it was amazing, but I was very intrigued by the concepts that it presented. And it has a lot of unique aspects to it that a lot of books don't have. And so I wanted to keep going with the series. And then last year, at the end of last year, beginning of this year, I picked up The Dragon Republic, which was an amazing book. Oh my, it is a big book. It's filled with so much themes and so many deep questions and some excellent worldview discussions that I really enjoyed. A lot of them I disagreed with, but I really enjoyed them. And in The Burning God, R.F. Kuang wraps up the story very neatly. It is exactly what I think the story should have been. And this story is able to continue to explore the deeper themes, but take it to the nth degree. Everything is taken to the extreme in this book, and I think that was a plus, not a negative. And so I'm going to go through my whole review, and then at the end I will provide my rating. But overall, you should know, very impressive work by R.F. Kuang. What's interesting about this series is how dark it is. You know, I've read some light series and I've read some dark books, and even the previous books in this series are dark. But boy, does the darkness get ratcheted up to 11 here. You are seeing brutal deaths, brutal living conditions, brutal things happening to people throughout this book series, particularly in this book. And it's so palpable. You can feel what's happening, and it produces a visceral reaction in the audience that I'm very impressed with. The fact that R.F. Kuang is able to pull all this off is quite good. You know, there's a lot of things in this trilogy that were established in Book 1 and some things in Book 2, and Kuang is able to effectively wrap them up here. You know, in Book 1 is mostly the Empire fighting the Federation, and then Book 2 is kind of like a rebellion of the Republic versus the Empire, and then Book 3 is about the Southern Coalition versus the Republic. And you see Rin going from coalition to coalition, just trying to survive and do the right thing. And you see this descent into madness in her, that she's trying to do the right thing, but she keeps doing things wrong. You know what she's doing is wrong in this book, and yet you feel so bad for her. You still feel so sympathetic and empathetic towards her. It's so impressive to have, you know, there are plenty of books where the villain is the bad guy and you understand where they're coming from. There are very few books where the hero is trying so hard to be heroic and yet failing so miserably, and you realize it and everyone else realizes it, but the hero just can't see it. It's so impressive. I would say that this book does what Game of Thrones Season 8 tried but failed to do. It's successful here, wasn't successful there. Once you read the book, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to. And what's also impressive is that she continues the Chinese history and philosophy in this book. Of course, the whole trilogy has been based off of Chinese history and philosophy, and R.F. Kuang is getting her doctorate in Asian studies, East Asian studies, and she's trying to establish discussions about racial problems in Asia. She's talking about colonization problems. There's a lot of discussion of what essentially is European colonization in this book. There's also discussion on war and poverty and governance. There's there's a period towards the end where a lot of the characters are discussing how to have good government. And it's a very complex issue, and I think that R.F. Kuang handles it quite well. I personally would have loved to see a lot more chapters devoted to that as opposed to the war, which I felt like dragged on a little bit, but what little we do get is really cool. And so the whole... This book trilogy makes me appreciate the whole Chinese history and philosophy that's discussed. It makes me think about reading more books by Chinese authors or by Chinese American authors or books that have to do with Chinese history. I feel similar to how I felt after the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden, which really put a focus on Russian history and Russian literature and Russian culture. The difference is, I think that this is a much better series, and this book is a much better final book than the Winter Night trilogy was. But still, it makes me impressed and want to read more, which is a good thing. The standout character in the first book for me was Alton, and also Jiang. And then the standout character in the second book, it was a tie between Nisha and Kate. And for me, the standout character in this book is the main character, Rin. She just goes through so much. I mentioned it before, you feel for her so bad. It's so impressive how much you feel for her in this book. And she just does some just gruesome, despicable things in this book that I really enjoyed. I discussed how Kuang is a thematic-based author, that her books are dripping with themes, and the first couple books had a lot about social class in society and about drug abuse in society, and this book certainly has that as well. But this book really leans heavily not into necessarily the horrors of war, such as battle, but the horrors of what comes afterwards in wars, talking about the pillaging of peoples, talking about what happens when people die, all this type of afterwards, what happens when people are executed just for trying to get food and stealing. Like, all these questions are thoroughly explored in this book, and she makes a very compelling argument. It's a very anti-war book in its stance. I disagree with a lot of the overall points that Kuang is making in the book, but she makes them so well that it makes me rethink them and have to reevaluate how I view R.F. Kuang's work. And the war discussions, it's not one-sided. There are counterpoints and counterarguments presented by some of the characters on why these wars are a good thing. And so it's not just hitting you over the head on one side, but it's very, very much obvious what the author wants you to believe, and it, I think, works very well in that regard. But my problem with this series, that I have with a lot of series that I've read, is that I feel so depressed afterwards. After I made this comment after I finished the Alphabet Squadron trilogy for Star Wars, but I'll say it here as well. I felt like I needed antidepressants after finishing this trilogy because it's so sad and so solemn, and there's so little hope. Whenever there's a morsel of hope in this trilogy, it gets yanked away immediately. And so I feel like this trilogy is not meant for the faint of heart. You have to really be okay with grimdark. This series is like the definition of grimdark, if ever there was one, other than Lord Grimdark himself, which I still have to read his books. But still, I felt so depressed after reading this book, and I don't like that feeling. I get putting deep themes and dark themes in your books, but I don't want to come out of it just like super sad. I had to go watch a TV show, a comedy sitcom afterwards because I just felt so heavy and so dark. But what this book series does in a good way is it shows that you don't have to enjoy a series to be impressed by it. You don't have to have fun with a series to be entertained by it. R.F. Kuang shows that there is value in just literature that isn't fun. and I think it's very impressive. But there is some elements that people will find fun. It's just, for me, it's not a style that I enjoy. But overall, I should point out that this is a wonderfully produced book, and it is part of a wonderfully produced series. I am so impressed with Harper Voyager, with R.F. Kuang. I will for sure continue reading her books when I have the chance. I am very, very impressed with her writing style, with her ability to hook audiences, with her ability to just delve into dark topics. Is so impressive. So I still think personally Dragon Republic was a much more fun book for me, and I enjoyed it a lot more. So this is still my favorite of the series, but I do think The Burning God is better than the first book, The Poppy War. So I would give this a 9.0 out of 10. A very, very impressive opening, and I'm very impressed with R.F. Kuang's writing style. So that's my rating, 9 out of 10. If you've read this book or any of the books in this series, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What did you think of the ending? Whew, this has an interesting ending that I called A Mile Away. Let me know your thoughts down below. Please subscribe to the channel. I have lots of fantasy and other book-related content on the channel. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.